Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the coast of Japan to a sleepy little fishing village where everything moved just a bit slower than the rest of the world. The air always smelled like salt and drying seaweed, and the wooden houses creaked softly like they were sighing in their sleep. You might not have experienced this before, where the quiet is so thick you can hear it brushing against your skin like the wings of a moth. This is a story from when I was around 11, maybe 12. That summer, I stayed with my aunt in a small town curled up between the ocean and a steep forested hill. It wasn't a place that made it onto maps with stars or dots, but for those few months, it was the whole world to me. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. I arrived by train, the kind that rattled like it had stories of its own. The ride had taken hours crossing from city to countryside, then from countryside to almost forgotten coast. By the time I stepped off, the sky was dimming, and everything smelled wet wooden platforms, sea air, and the last traces of sun on warm stone. My aunt was waiting at the station wearing her usual straw hat and a cardigan, even though it was warm. She gave me a hug and told me I'd grown taller since spring. I always stayed with her when school ended. Mom said it was good for me to slow down, though I was never really sure what that meant. Her house sat near the edge of the village, tucked behind a row of bent pine trees. It was old and creaky and perfect. She had a cat named Maru who didn't like anyone, and a garden of hydrangeas that looked like soft blue clouds. I dropped my bag by the front door and went straight out to the back porch. From there, you could see the ocean stretched out like a lazy dog wagging its tail at the sky. The tide was out, and I could just barely see some dark shapes fishing boats, maybe rocking gently near the horizon. That first evening was quiet. No cars, no shouting, just the tick-tick of cicadas and the occasional creak of a shutter. I helped my aunt make onigiri for dinner, and we sat on the porch eating them with miso soup while the sun melted behind the sea. I remember feeling like time didn't matter there. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of rice and something frying. My room was upstairs, and through the thin paper screen, I could see the square of sunlight growing across the tatami mat. I dressed quickly, pulled on my sandals, and nearly tripped over Maru on the way to the kitchen. "You should go see the beach," my aunt said, handing me a slice of eggplant brushed with soy sauce. "It'll be low tide all morning. Just don't go too far past the rocks." I nodded, stuffed the eggplant in my mouth, and was out the door. The beach was mostly stone and shell, not soft sand like I was used to. The tide had rolled back to reveal pools of water with little crabs, silver fish, and curling strips of seaweed. I spent an hour hopping between them, pretending I was on some alien planet. And that's when I saw him. A boy about my age standing barefoot in the surf like he belonged there. He was wearing a wide white shirt and dark blue shorts, and his eyes, they were the color of sea glass. That kind of cloudy green that looks almost clear in the sunlight. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and smiled like we already knew each other. "Hi," I said. He nodded once, then bent down and picked up something from the tide pool. A flat stone, dark and smooth. He held it out to me. I took it, feeling the cool weight in my palm. "Thanks." Then without another word, he turned and walked along the shore toward the cliffs, his feet making soft plopping sounds in the wet sand. I watched him until he disappeared behind the rocks. Back at the house, I showed the stone to my aunt. She took one look and her eyebrows lifted. "You found this?" "A boy gave it to me." She didn't ask who. She just touched the stone again and said softly, "That's lucky, you know. Sea stones with a ring around them, very lucky." I looked again and noticed faintly a pale white circle etched naturally into its surface, like a halo. Later that night, I sat on the porch again, cradling the stone and watching the sky darken. I didn't see the boy that evening or the next, but something about the way he stood in the tide stuck with me. That whole first week was slow and warm and dreamlike. I helped my aunt gather herbs from the hill, chased Maru off the porch more times than I could count, and listened to the gulls fight over scraps by the docks. I kept going back to the beach, always wondering if I'd see the boy again. One morning I did. He was sitting on a driftwood log, tying bits of string to a wooden frame. A kite, I realized. "You like kites?" I asked. He looked up and nodded. "The wind here's good." We didn't say much more, but that was the start of something quiet and simple and good. The next few days drifted by like clouds over the ocean, slow, soft, and somehow just out of reach. Every morning I'd head down to the beach, and somehow, without fail, the boy would be there before me. He never said how he got there or where he lived, but he always had something in his hands: a shell, a tangle of string, a piece of driftwood carved into a fish or boat or bird. One morning he handed me a bundle of thin paper and sticks. "For you," he said simply. It was a kite, smaller than his, but beautiful. The frame was made of slender bamboo, the paper painted with a swirl of red and yellow like a firebird in flight. I ran my fingers along the edges and felt something warm in my chest. No one had ever made me something like that before. "I've never flown a kite before," I admitted. He didn't seem surprised. "We'll go up to the cliffs." The cliffs were about a 15-minute walk from the edge of town past the pine grove and an old torii gate half swallowed by vines. There wasn't much of a path, just a narrow track worn by footsteps and wind. But he walked it like he'd done it 100 times. The grass up there swayed like water, and the sky felt impossibly wide. The ocean crashed far below, sending up bursts of foam that caught the sunlight like silver. "This is where the wind lives," he said, his voice quiet. We stood side by side, holding our kites. His was shaped like a swallowtail painted in deep blue with tiny white stars. He adjusted the strings of mine, checking the knots, making sure it was balanced. Then he pointed toward the open stretch of sky above the sea. "Run!" So I did. I ran across the field, hard thudding, the kite tugging at my hand like it wanted to leave me behind. The wind caught it fast. It surged upward with a snap, climbing higher and higher until it danced in the blue like a living thing. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, and looked back to see the boy watching me with a small crooked grin. He let his own kite rise slowly, almost lazily, until both were soaring together, weaving lazy arcs like birds in migration. For a while we said nothing, just stood there with our faces tilted toward the sun, eyes following the dance in the sky. Then out of nowhere the wind shifted. It didn't just change direction, it snapped. One second the kite was tugging gently in my hands, and the next it was yanked hard, the string burning across my fingers before it slipped free entirely. I shouted, tried to grab it, but it was already gone, swept up and away, higher and higher, then lower, then twisting out of sight behind the cliff's edge. I stood there stunned. The boy lowered his kite and came to stand beside me. "It's okay," he said. I felt tears sting my eyes. It just flew away. He looked at me, not unkindly, maybe not forever. We looked out over the sea, now calm again, as if nothing had happened. My hand still tingled from the string burn, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had slipped out of my grasp. Back at the house, I told my aunt what had happened. She was making green tea, and she didn't look up when she answered. "If the sea wants something, it takes it, but it gives back too." I frowned. "It's just a kite." She stirred the pot slowly. "Sometimes things come back changed." That night I dreamed of kites flying through stars, not just in the sky, but above towns and forests and oceans. I saw my red and yellow firebird circling over the cliff, dipping close to the sea, and then just before I woke up, it turned and looked back at me like it had eyes. The next day I went back to the cliffs. The boy wasn't there. I waited. The wind came and went. The sky changed, but he didn't come. I thought maybe I'd imagined him. Maybe the whole thing, kites, cliffs, the gift, was just a dream folded inside summer heat. But when I looked down at my hands, I could still see the thin pink lines where the string had burned. I stayed until the sun started sinking, then walked home slowly through the whispering grass. That evening, I sat on the porch again. My aunt was knitting, Maru was asleep on the railing, and the air was full of the soft whine of cicadas. "Did you see your friend?" she asked, without looking up. I shook my head. "No." She smiled a little. "He'll come back. The sea's full of returns." I didn't understand what she meant, but that phrase stuck with me, turning over in my mind like a smooth pebble. The sea's full of returns. And as the sky darkened and the first stars came out, I found myself looking east toward the cliffs and the water, and whatever strange current had carried my kite away. The next morning, the sky was full of soft gray clouds, the kind that didn't promise rain, but made everything feel slower and quieter, like the world was under a big wool blanket. I dressed and walked to the kitchen, where my aunt was slicing daikon into thin white moons. "Going back out today?" she asked. I nodded, though I didn't know where I was going yet. I hadn't seen the boy since the day my kite flew away. A part of me thought maybe he'd disappeared with it. My feet found their way to the cliffs again. The wind up there was gentler today, almost hesitant. The tall grass tickled my knees as I walked the path slower than usual, scanning the horizon for any sign of color. Red paper, white string, anything. But the sky was empty. Still I stayed. I sat on the big flat rock near the edge and let the breeze wash over me. From up there, the world seemed to tilt just slightly, the sea stretching out like spilled paint. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard footsteps behind me. It was him. The boy. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair damp, like he'd been running along the shore. In his hand, he held something small and square wrapped in cloth. "You came back," I said, not hiding the relief in my voice. He nodded and sat beside me without speaking for a while. "I'm sorry about the kite," I said. He shrugged. "The sea wanted it." I gave a quiet laugh. "Does it take things often?" He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a few slices of pickled plum and a rice ball. He offered me half and I took it. It was sour and salty and somehow exactly what I needed. My grandfather used to say, he began chewing thoughtfully, that the sea is like a mirror. Whatever it sees in you, it gives back eventually. That sounds like something my aunt would say. She's smart. We ate in silence for a while, watching the gulls circle and call above us. Then he turned to me, eyes serious. "Want to fly another one?" I blinked. "Another kite?" He nodded, pulling a folded frame from his side bag. It was smaller this time, shaped like a dragonfly and covered in indigo paper with pale yellow lines. "I made it for today's wind," he said. We walked further up the hill, where the breeze was stronger. He adjusted the string again, just like before, and then handed it to me. "This one's not meant to fly high," he said. "Just enough." I ran more carefully this time, and the kite lifted into the air like it had been waiting all morning. It danced in the soft current, dipping and climbing, never too far from my reach. I turned to him, smiling. "It's perfect." He smiled back. Sometimes the sky only wants to borrow things. We spent the rest of the afternoon up there, taking turns flying the dragonfly kite, chasing after each dip and loop. At one point, he told me the names of different winds, how the fishermen had special words for each one. Yamaji, the mountain wind. Shiokasi, the salt breeze from the shore. I asked him how he knew all that. "My father used to fish," he said simply, "before the sea took him." I looked at him, unsure what to say. But he didn't seem sad, just calm, like he'd already made peace with it. Like it was something the sea had borrowed and would one day return. That evening, I walked home through the pine grove with the kite carefully tucked under my arm. My aunt was waiting on the porch as always, her teacup steaming beside her. "New kite?" she asked. "Borrowed," I said, and she smiled like she understood more than I did. After dinner, I sat by the window with a small candle flickering nearby. Outside, the cicadas had quieted, and only the sound of distant waves remained. I thought about the boy's words about the sea being a mirror, and about the way he said the sky only wanted to borrow things. I found myself holding the Firebird stone again, the one he gave me on the first day. Its faint white ring shimmered slightly in the candlelight. Maybe the kite wasn't lost. Maybe it was just traveling. That night, I dreamed of it soaring high above the cliffs, drifting on the back of the wind, searching for its way home. The weather changed the next day. The clouds thickened into darker shades of gray, and the waves down at the shore slapped harder against the rocks. My aunt said a storm was coming, not a big one, just one of those quick summer tempests that rolled in from the open sea like an unexpected guest. Don't go far today, she warned as she filled a thermos with hot barley tea. Storms move quickly here. The sea is faster than you think. I promised her I wouldn't go past the pine grove, but I already knew where I was headed. Not to the cliffs this time, but to the old lighthouse. I'd noticed it the first week I arrived, standing alone near the edge of a narrow outcrop. It wasn't in use anymore, hadn't been according to my aunt for decades. But from a distance, it looked like it still kept watch over the bay, tall and slightly leaning, a stone guardian, squinting out to sea. The boy had mentioned it once in passing. You ever been there, I'd asked. He had only shrugged and said only on quiet days. Well, today wasn't exactly quiet, but something in me wanted to see it up close. The path to the lighthouse was overgrown with thick grasses and a few stubborn rust-colored shrubs. The wind tugged at my sleeves and the air carried the metallic scent of coming rain. The lighthouse loomed ahead, pale and cracked, with black streaks running down its sides like dried tears. I didn't expect anyone to be there. But when I reached the small doorway at the base, I saw that it had been recently opened. The lock hung loose, and the door creaked as if it had been disturbed not long ago. I pushed it gently. Inside, it smelled of salt and old books. Dust floated through the air like lazy snowflakes. A narrow spiral staircase curled upward, but before I could decide whether to climb it, I heard the soft shuffling of feet. Then a voice back again. I froze. An old man appeared from a shadowed corner holding a mug and wearing layers of mismatched sweaters. His eyes were pale, almost clouded, but sharp in a strange, knowing way. Didn't expect visitors today, he said, taking a slow sip from his mug. I didn't know anyone lived here, I said quietly. He chuckled. Most people don't, but the sea tells me when someone's coming. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. He gestured to a wooden chair. Sit if you like. You've brought wind with you. I sat. The chair creaked beneath me, but it held. From the small round window beside us, I could see the sea churning, just slightly harder than before. You're the one who lost the red kite, he said suddenly. My head snapped toward him. How did you know that? He tapped his temple. The sea told me. I must have looked skeptical because he smiled. You think the ocean is just water and waves it remembers. Everything we give it. Kites, laughter, promises, even people. I thought of the boy, of his strange, quiet way of speaking, of how he seemed to disappear when the tide came in. Is it true the sea gives things back, I asked. The old man looked out the window. Sometimes, but never in the same way. The sea doesn't return what you lost, it returns what you're meant to find. I didn't know what that meant, not exactly, but it stuck with me like the wind catching the edge of your shirt and tugging you gently forward. The old man stood and stretched. Storm will be here by nightfall. You better head home. I nodded, thanked him, and stepped back out into the wind. By the time I reached the pine grove, the sky had darkened, and the trees were whispering louder than usual. The first drops of rain fell just as I saw my aunt's house in the distance. That night, the storm came in full. The wind howled against the walls, and the sea roared like it was telling a story no one could quite understand. Lightning flashed once, twice, lighting up the hallway outside my bedroom, like a dream turned inside out. I lay in bed listening to the rain lash the windows and thought about the lighthouse. About the boy who gave me a kite. About the old man who spoke to the sea. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept waiting for the wind to whisper something back. The storm passed just before dawn, leaving everything soaked and glistening in a silver blue haze. I woke to the sound of dripping water, steady rhythmic, like the slow ticking of a giant clock. Outside my window, the garden was a tangle of bent stems and flattened flowers. The hydrangeas looked like they'd bowed to the storm and decided to stay that way. Downstairs, my aunt was wiping water from the windowsill. "Strong one," she said, wringing out the cloth, but not angry. I poured myself a cup of barley tea and sat by the open door, letting the damp morning air drift in. The sea looked different, restless, like it hadn't quite settled after the night's tossing and turning. My thoughts went straight to the boy. He hadn't been at the cliffs for a few days now. Not since he gave me the dragonfly kite. Not since the day I'd visited the lighthouse. I wanted to ask my aunt more about him, but every time I brought him up, she only smiled and said things like, "Some friends come with the tide," which didn't exactly clear things up. That morning I walked the shoreline. The beach was littered with all the strange gifts the sea offers after a storm, twisted branches, sea glass, dead crabs, a single soggy shoe, and jellyfish. Dozens of them. They glowed faintly in the early light, pale, soft, and almost unreal. Their bodies pulsed gently with a quiet bioluminescence, a blue-white shimmer like starlight underwater. I crouched beside one, careful not to touch it, and watched its strange, slow breathing. The tide was going out, pulling the jellyfish back toward the deeper sea. One by one, they slipped into the waves like ghosts returning to some other world. That's when I saw it, something floating just beyond the rocks. It wasn't glowing like the jellyfish. It was a dark shape bobbing gently in the surf. At first, I thought it was just driftwood, but as I got closer, I saw cloth, red cloth. My heart kicked. I scrambled over the slick rocks, careful not to slip, until I could see it clearly. A kite. Not just any kite, my kite, the Firebird. It was tangled in seaweed and damp, but it was still whole. The colors were faded, but unmistakable red and yellow swirls like flame caught in paper. The string had wrapped itself around a piece of driftwood, holding it in place just long enough for me to find it. I reached into the cold water and pulled it free. The paper crinkled softly in my hands, heavy with moisture. The bamboo frame was intact. A few of the knots were loose, but nothing was broken. How, after all this time, after a storm, I turned slowly, half expecting to see the boy standing somewhere nearby, maybe half hidden behind a dune or rock, watching with that quiet smile. But the beach was empty. Only the jellyfish remained glowing faintly as they drifted into the receding tide. I carried the kite back to my aunt's house like it was made of glass. She met me at the door and raised her eyebrows when she saw what I was holding. "I told you," she said, "the sea gives things back." But how, I asked, "It's like..." It waited. She didn't answer right away. Just poured us both warm tea and sat with me on the porch. The air smelled like wet leaves and salt. "When I was your age," she began, "I lost a hairpin in the waves. It was a simple one, silver shaped like a crescent moon. I dropped it by accident while collecting shells." She paused and took a sip of her tea. "10 years later, your uncle and I came here on our honeymoon. And while walking along the same beach, I found that pin stuck in the sand. It was right where I'd been standing a decade before." I stared at her. "You're serious?" She nodded. "The sea doesn't work on our time." I looked back down at my kite, now drying gently in the sun. That evening, I went back to the cliffs. The wind had returned, calm but steady, and I brought the kite with me. Its colors caught the dying light, just barely like the last glow of embers. I didn't try to fly it. Not yet. I just held it, letting the breeze play with the edges of the paper, and whispered quietly, "Thank you." And though I knew I was alone up there, I could have sworn I heard a soft laugh carried on the windlight, familiar and kind. The next morning, the sky had that clear, washed-out look it only gets after a storm, like the clouds had scrubbed it clean. The sea was calm again, smooth and blue and stretching out to forever. Birds called overhead, dipping and soaring, as if the world had reset itself overnight. My red kite, now dry, leaned beside the door. Its colors were softer now, weathered, not ruined. It looked like something that had been through a story. At breakfast, I finally asked my aunt the question I'd been carrying for days. Who is he? She didn't pretend not to understand. She set her teacup down slowly and looked out the window toward the sea. People call him many names, she said. Some think he's just a local boy. Some think he's the wind. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled faintly. When I was a girl, I saw him too. He gave me a shell that hummed when I held it to my ear. Said the sea was full of voices. I waited for her to explain further, but she didn't. Instead, she stood and went to the low cabinet near the entryway. After a moment of rummaging, she returned with a folded yellow sheet of paper, an old newspaper clipping. It was from years ago. Decades. The headline read something like "Local Boy Lost at Sea in Summer Storm." Below was a faded photograph, black and white, slightly blurred, but still clear enough. I knew the face. It was him. Same sea glass eyes, same crooked smile. I stared at the image, barely breathing. That can't be. He was about your age, my aunt said softly. Loved the cliffs, flew kites every afternoon. They say he was trying to rescue one that got caught in a tree by the edge of the bluff when he slipped. I shook my head slowly. But I've been talking to him. He gave me a kite. He eats rice balls. She took my hand, her grip warm and steady. Not everything can be explained. Some memories are too strong to let go. And some people, well, they're loved by the wind. That afternoon, I walked to the docks where the older men mended nets and smoked long, thin cigarettes. I didn't say much, just listened. One of them, a wiry man with deep laugh lines and a voice like gravel, told a story about a boy who always appeared when storms were coming. Seen him when I was 15, he said. Just a glimpse. Standing on the rocks, holding a kite like he owned the whole sky. Another nodded, only ever on odd-numbered days. I asked them if they knew his name. They shook their heads. The sea doesn't give names, one of them said, just sightings. Later, my aunt and I walked to the village shrine. It was small and overgrown, tucked behind a curtain of bamboo. I helped her light incense and sweep the path clean. On the altar, she placed a tiny paper crane. For safe returns, she whispered. As we walked back, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the quiet fields. I don't think he's a ghost, I said suddenly. She looked at me surprised. I think maybe he was once, I continued, but now he's something else. She smiled. I think you're right. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because everything felt too full. My chest, my head, even the silence of my room, it all buzzed with something I couldn't quite name. Around midnight, I got up and slipped outside. The moon was high and round, and the wind had a warm edge to it. I followed the path toward the sea without thinking, my feet moving, like they knew the way better than I did. And that's when I saw it. The tide had rolled far out, revealing a wide stretch of smooth, damp sand. And walking across it, bathed in moonlight, was the boy. He didn't turn to look at me, but he raised a hand holding something above his head. A kite. Mine. The firebird reborn, shining faintly in the moonlight, glowing like it had gathered the storm's energy and kept it tucked in its paper bones. He let it go. It rose without effort, without string, without wind. Just lifted as if answering some silent call from above. It circled once, twice, then drifted out toward the horizon and vanished. When I turned back toward the village, the beach was empty. The days that followed felt different, lighter, as if something deep beneath the surface had shifted and settled. The sea was calm again, more playful than mysterious, and even the gulls seemed to cry less sharply in the morning. But the boy didn't return. Not on the cliffs, not at the beach, not in the pine grove or near the old shrine. I looked for him in all the usual places. Nothing. I started bringing small things with me each day, a rice ball wrapped in cloth, a paper crane. I made a polished shell I found among the rocks, leaving them behind in quiet spots, as if they were little offerings or maybe just reminders. I'd gotten used to him being there. Not in a loud or obvious way, but like the way you get used to the sea itself, always there, just out of reach. And then one morning after a night of restless dreams, I woke to silence. No wind, no waves, no birds. Even Maru, the eternally grumpy cat, seemed confused, crouching near the door with his ears turned back. The air felt thick and expectant, like the whole village was holding its breath. I walked to the beach, heart thudding with something I didn't have words for yet. The tide was low again, stretching far out to reveal the dark, glistening rocks and puddled sand. It was a strange low tide, not wide and open, but curled in on itself like a breath pulled too far in. I scanned the shoreline. No sign of the boy. But then I noticed something else, footprints. Not mine. Not anyone else's. Just one set, small and barefoot, pressed deeply into the sand, like they had been left only moments before. They led toward the cliffs, winding past the tide pools and up through the narrow path carved between the tall grasses. I followed them. Each step felt like I was walking deeper into a memory, one I didn't know I had. The wind started to return just a little at first, brushing past my shoulders, ruffling the edge of my shirt. When I reached the top of the cliffs, I stopped. The sky was thick with clouds, but the sun broke through in thin golden beams, lighting patches of the ocean like stage lights. I turned slowly, following the trail of prints across the soft, damp earth. And there at the very edge was the last one. A perfect print, toes pointed toward the sea. Then nothing, like he'd vanished mid-step. I looked out at the water. It was moving again now, slow and even curling in long, lazy strokes against the rocks below. A breeze tugged gently at my sleeves, and in it I thought I heard something, laughter, soft and brief, like it had come from far away. I crouched and touched the final footprint. It was still damp, still real. I stayed there for a long time until the sun slid lower and the sea's voice grew louder. When I stood to leave, something caught my eye, tangled in a patch of grass just off the path. A thread, reddish and thin and frayed, fluttering slightly in the breeze. I reached down and pulled it free. It was kite string, the same kind we'd used weeks ago. It led through the grass like a trail curling between reeds and over the crest of the hill. I followed it, my hand brushing it lightly to keep it from tangling. Eventually, it led me down the other side of the bluff to a small hidden alcove I'd never noticed before. There, nestled in a pile of driftwood and seaweed, was something that stopped me in my tracks. The frame of a kite. Not mine, not the dragonfly, a new one. The paper was pale white, speckled with gold flecks that shimmered in the light like scales on a fish. It looked unfinished, half-constructed, almost waiting to be made whole. But it was beautiful, delicate, and somehow familiar. I knelt beside it and lifted it gently into my lap. The string was still attached, still red, still warm, and I realized he had left it for me. Not a goodbye, a continuation. A whisper on the wind, "It's your turn now." I carried the white and gold kite home in both hands, walking slowly, careful not to jostle it. The frame creaked gently with every step, like it was breathing. By the time I reached the garden, the wind had picked up again, steady, playful threading through the pine trees and tugging at my sleeves, as if it already knew I was bringing something meant for it. My aunt was hanging laundry in the backyard, her straw hat tilted low over her eyes. She looked up as I stepped through the gate. "Found something?" she asked, voice soft as ever. I nodded and held the kite up like an offering. Her eyes crinkled. "Ah, that one." I blinked. "You know it." She nodded. "That design's been seen before. It always appears near the end of summer." I waited for her to explain, but she didn't. Instead, she reached out and gently ran a finger along the bamboo frame. "Did he give it to you?" she asked. "I think so." She gave a small smile, then pointed toward the far end of the yard, where the hills dipped down into a clearing. "There's an old path through the reeds," she said. "Leads to a place where the wind is kind." I looked in that direction, already feeling my legs wanting to go. But first I finished repairing the kite. It took me most of the afternoon. I sat on the porch with the string tied to my wrist so it wouldn't get stolen by a sudden gust. I reinforced the bamboo frame with a bit of thin wire from the tool shed and used clear rice glue to seal a small tear along the bottom corner. My aunt brought me a cup of cold barley tea and a quiet nod of approval. By late afternoon, the kite was ready. I followed the path she'd mentioned through tall reeds that rattled like bones in the wind, past a line of old stones, half swallowed by moss, until I reached a small open field with a low rise overlooking the sea. And there, waiting in the center of it all, was the wind. Not strong, not wild, just steady, gentle, inviting. I stood for a while, feeling it wrap around me like a scarf. Then I raised the kite and let it catch. It didn't resist. It lifted quickly, higher than any kite I'd flown all summer. The golden flecks on the paper caught the late sun, flashing like signals. It soared, dipping slightly, then climbing again, writing invisible words across the sky. And as I watched it move, I felt something stir inside me. A memory not quite mine. Images flashed behind my eyes, a boy with sea glass eyes running across this very field, holding a red kite that blazed against the blue, a pair of hands threading string. Laughter carried on the wind. The kite danced, the string hummed in my hands. Then I heard it, footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned, but it wasn't the boy, it was Maru. The cat somehow had followed me all the way down the trail, tail twitching in annoyance. He gave me a flat look as if to say, "About time you remembered where the real adventure is." I laughed, actually laughed out loud, and sat back down in the grass, the string wound around my fingers, the wind tugging gently at my shirt. Evening came slowly. The sky turned pink, then gold. Then that deep, endless blue that only comes just before stars appear. The kite still flew steady and high, a small bright shape against the dusk. And in that moment I felt him there, not beside me, not in the grass, but in the movement of the kite itself. He was the curve of the breeze, the rhythm of the pull, the quiet whisper between gusts. And I realized then that he hadn't left at all. He had simply changed shape. He had become part of the story the sea was telling. Eventually, I let the kite drift lower, slowly, gently. It landed near my feet, the paper rustling softly like it was saying thank you. I picked it up, pressed my palm against the warm bamboo, and whispered back, "You're welcome." The next morning, I woke before the sun. The sky outside my window was still a soft gray, brushed with faint hints of pink at the edges. Maru had curled up at my feet sometime in the night, purring in his sleep, a quiet rhythm that matched the sound of the sea in the distance. I slipped out of bed without waking him and stepped into the cool morning air. The village was silent, no footsteps, no shutters opening, no bikes rattling past the gate, just the gentle hush of waves and the whisper of wind brushing through the bamboo. I carried the kite with me. This time I didn't head for the cliffs or the clearing or the shore. I took the long path that wound behind the shrine through the cedar woods up the back hill where old stones sat like sleeping giants. It wasn't a place I visited often, and honestly I hadn't even remembered it until I woke up that morning with a strange sense of knowing. Halfway up I found something unexpected. An old bench carved from wood and stone moss growing along the edges like a soft green shawl. On the bench sat a small wooden box. It was unmarked, no lock, no hinges. I sat beside it for a long while before lifting the lid. Inside were fragments, paper scraps, faded photographs, string wrapped around sticks. Each item looked like it had once been part of something larger. I lifted a piece of paper and held it up to the light. It was the corner of a kite, red, weathered, familiar, and written on the back in a looping, careful hand was a single word: return. I didn't take anything from the box. I didn't need to. Somehow I understood. This was a memory box, not mine but everyone's. A quiet place for pieces the sea had sent back. Not to be claimed, but simply remembered. I stood and continued up the hill. At the top, the sky stretched wide and endless. The wind was waiting, not tugging or impatient, just present. The way an old friend stands beside you without needing to say a word. I flew the kite again, higher this time, with more confidence. The golden flecks shimmered against the pale morning sky, catching little streaks of sunlight as the sun rose behind the trees. It twirled, dipped, climbed, playful like it was alive. And as I watched it dance, I thought of him, the boy. Not a ghost, not quite real, maybe both. A boy who had lived here once, who had flown kites and vanished into wind and story. A boy who had made friends not by speaking loudly, but by leaving gifts behind string stones, quiet silences. And maybe by returning the things the sea once borrowed. I sat there all morning, letting the hours slip past like leaves on a stream. People in the village began to stir their voices, faint and distant. But I stayed watching the sky, watching the kite, until something changed. A second shape appeared. It came from far off, rising steadily from beyond the pine trees, another kite. I stood up, heart quickening. It was blue, swallow-tailed, the one he used to fly. It didn't fly straight. It dipped and swayed oddly, like someone unfamiliar with its weight was holding the string. But it rose steadily, all the same growing larger as it neared the edge of the clearing. I waited. The flyer emerged from the trees, a younger girl, maybe 8 or 9, with wide eyes and messy braids. She looked at me shyly and held up the spool of string. I found it this morning, she said, on my doorstep. I smiled. It's a good one. I think it wants to fly again, she whispered. I nodded. It already is. And then just for a moment, as both our kites rose together, I saw him. A flicker, a silhouette on the ridge. Standing tall, arms crossed, wind tugging at his shirt. He didn't wave, he didn't need to. He simply turned and walked into the trees. The final week of summer slipped by in a golden haze, soft and weightless. The kind of days that didn't leave strong footprints, just warm impressions that stayed behind in the mind, like seafoam on sand. Each morning I visited the clearing on the hill. The girl with the swallow kite came back, often always quiet, always a little braver. We never talked much, just shared the sky. Some days our kites would tangle midair and crash together in the grass, and we'd fall over laughing, brushing grass seeds from our clothes and pretending we weren't competing for altitude. I'd see her mother waiting at the base of the hill in the late afternoon, a small figure leaning against a bicycle, her hair tucked under a scarf. She never asked questions, just waved gently and waited. My aunt said the girl was new to the village. They'd moved here from the city looking for slower days and cleaner air, the kind of reasons people give when they're running from something or hoping to remember something they've lost. The girl didn't talk about where she came from. She just flew kites, and I understood that better than anything else. One evening, just before the sun touched the sea, I brought the white and gold kite back to the cliffs. Not to fly it, but to let it go. It felt right. The air was still and warm, the wind moving more like a breath than a gust. I tied the string to a driftwood post near the edge of the bluff and stepped back. The kite lifted slowly, then all at once rising into the orange-pink sky without my hands guiding it. It danced for a long time. Then the wind shifted, and the string snapped gently like it had made its own decision. The kite soared, out across the water, toward the setting sun. I didn't cry, not exactly, but I stood there until the light faded and the stars came out one by one, soft and blinking, like the sky was remembering its place in the story too. When I returned home, the porch light was on. My aunt had made warm miso soup and cut slices of melons so sweet they almost tasted like flowers. We ate quietly with the windows open and the scent of the sea curling through the house, like a memory that hadn't fully settled. Afterward, I sat with her on the porch steps. Maru jumped into my lap and promptly decided to take up more space than necessary. "What happens next?" I asked her. She sipped her tea. "You keep flying." I looked up. "Even if the kites don't come back." She smiled, especially then. And I realized what she meant. Flying a kite isn't about keeping it forever. It's about letting it go again and again and trusting that something of it stays in the wind. The boy had known that, so had she. And now, maybe I did too. The next morning I packed my suitcase. The summer was ending and it was time to return to the city. School noise, fast trains, the smell of hot pavement. I wasn't dreading it, not exactly. But I felt something settle in my chest like I was closing a favorite book mid-sentence. Before we left, I walked down to the beach one last time. The tide was rising gently, brushing against the same rocks I'd stood on when I found the Firebird kite. There was nothing waiting there now, just shells, foam, driftwood. I smiled and picked up a small pale pebble shaped like a teardrop. I slipped it into my pocket, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that some things come back and some things become us. The sea hums low tonight. Outside your window, maybe there's a breeze brushing the trees or the distant murmur of traffic like a quiet river. But in this moment, I want you to imagine something else. You're back on the cliff, standing where the grass moves like water, looking out at the horizon that never quite ends. The sky is soft now, blue, fading to violet clouds glowing like sleep caught mid-drift. Above you, a single kite floats slowly, gold flecks, blinking like distant stars. You're not holding the string anymore. But it's okay. The wind knows. And in your chest, there's no tightness. No need to reach, to catch, to keep. Just the gentle rhythm of breath and breeze moving together, lifting you little by little towards something vast and calm. You sit down in the grass, close your eyes. Let the last sounds of summer drift over you like a lullaby you half remember. Crickets begin to sing. The waves below lap gently against the rocks, patient and even. The air smells like salt, like sweet grass, like peace. And somewhere in that space between memory and dream, the boy is still there, running along the edge of the hill. Laughter in the wind, his kite climbing endlessly into the evening sky. You don't need to call after him. You already know. He'll return like all things the sea once borrowed. Sleep gently now. You've flown far enough for today. End of script. Sweet dreams.